From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Thank you for joining the McLaughlin Group, a show where friends disagree agreeably. I'm your host, Tom Rogan. This week's panelists are author and columnist Pat Buchanan, the columnist Eleanor Clift of the Daily Beast, columnist Clarence Page of the Chicago Tribune, and Real Clear Politics columnist A.B. Stoddard. Okay, let's get to issue 1, Democrats debate.
I have made clear what my principles are here, and that is costs will go up for the wealthy and for big corporations, and for hardworking middle-class families, costs will go down.
A yes or no question that didn't get a yes or no answer.
Look, I don't have a beef with billionaires. We need a wealth tax in order to make investments in the next generation.
My son did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. Rudy Giuliani, the president, and his thugs have already proven that they, in fact, are flat lying.
12 Democrats took to Westerville, Ohio on Tuesday to offer their competing plans for the nation's future. Who won? Who lost? Well, we'll let the panel decide.
Pat, who won? Who lost?
You know, when General MacArthur retired and before Congress, he said, old soldiers never die, they just fade away. Joe Biden is just fading away, Tom. I think he's the leader now and was the one under attack there. It's Elizabeth Warren, and she's a very capable candidate, doing extremely well, but she doesn't have a single senator supporting her other than Markey, as I understand it, or a governor. She's very far to the left. I think the Democratic establishment realizes she can't win, and I think they're going to try to push Klobuchar or Buttigieg. In my estimation, Buttigieg is the best bet to be pushed to try to be the Democratic nominee. But he's got some real drawbacks, I think, that would preclude him from being elected president of the United States. I think the Democrats have got a real problem.
Eleanor.
I don't think there are any clear winners or losers. The debates have not proven to be decisive, and so the beat goes on. I think the Warren honeymoon is over. She's being appropriately challenged on her plans, which are really quite pie in the sky, and her refusal to answer directly what Bernie Sanders has already acknowledged, that Medicare for all would raise taxes, really damages her brand of being, forthright. So I understand her campaign is now going through some sort of, makeover to try to figure this out. As for Biden, I thought he handled the issue with his son, and the other Democrats are not going to go after him on that, because that would be just, purveying the Trump talking points. Biden doesn't have to win these debates. He just has to survive, and he has survived, and his poll ratings are holding up, particularly among African Americans. And so I think this is going to be a protracted battle that goes on. Buttigieg may well do well in Iowa, but I don't really see him as the nominee. I think Warren has challenges, definitely. Sanders is going to stay in. I was glad to see him looking healthy, and he even managed to smile a couple of times, thanking people for the well wishes. So I think it's a battle that will go on. I wouldn't count out Biden.
A.B.
I agree. I think he's faded for now, but this is so fluid, and it's such a divided party that I do think that it's not going to be surprising to any of us if he ends up, after a long battle, the nominee or a top contender until the bitter end. I do think that it was heartening to see the fact that Amy Klobuchar raised more money than any of them overnight after the debate, a sign that there is a center to the Democratic Party. Most of those people are probably supporting Biden, but they're concerned about the fact that he could fade in the next year. They're looking for alternatives. There doesn't seem to be one. They liked the fact that Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Senator Klobuchar went after Elizabeth Warren, challenging her fantasy math, and tried to bring the debate back to the middle where they think they can win, and I thought that was heartening. I think Elizabeth Warren is the sort of dream nominee for President Trump, and I think Pat's right, the party needs to be nervous about that.
A.B., to do a quick follow-up before I go to Clarence, one of the things we learned this week as well is that Joe Biden's fundraising has been particularly poor based on what he has in the bank. Do you think that's a problem for him, or do you think because he's a former vice president, he gets so much free media, he can, ride that wave?
No, I think he's running a huge operation, and he is going to need to get out there and raise more money. I think that burn rate, the fact that he's down to under 9 million, is a warning sign.
Clarence.
Yeah, I think everybody's right here, by the way. Basically, Joe Biden, I wouldn't count him out yet. No votes have been cast yet. This is always, I keep reminding myself of that. Those of us who pay attention to the polls need to be humbled every so often by the voters themselves. And Joe Biden does have staying power among black voters, among in the industrial upper Midwest, all those areas of strength that he's had before. He still has them. He hasn't expanded on that base. That's the problem for him right now, and as kind of ominous.
You mentioned the African American vote. Look, you got 5 candidates we've talked about mainly, and Biden, Bernie, Warren, Buttigieg, and Klobuchar, all white folks. And when you get to South Carolina, 61% of the Democratic electorate is African American.
That's right.
If they don't have a candidate, and I, as you know, I've said that I don't think Biden's going to make it. I think he'd get good support. I don't know how these other Democrats, the socialists.
Do you think Harris will be the person?
I don't think they've got one. I think that what everybody says, those folks are fading away.
I can't speak for all African Americans, obviously, but I don't think they
necessarily.
Yes, and I hope you make the point. I don't think they necessarily feel they have to have a black person in the race, or they don't have a candidate. I think that's going too far. And so far, they really have put a lot of their confidence into Biden. It may not hold up, but Cory Booker doesn't seem to have any attraction. So
I think, by the way, Hillary Clinton's a good example of someone who was very popular with African Americans, but it didn't show up on election day. Because the campaign kind of took black voters for granted.
Do you think Elizabeth Warren?
Let Harris finish. Do you want to continue?
No, that's fine.
Do you think Elizabeth Warren has that kind of appeal? Buttigieg.
No, she doesn't either.
Let me tell you, Buttigieg, he gets into South Carolina. I know something about that state, but some of the Democratic vote in there is very socially conservative.
Well, I know something about Fort Wayne, Indiana, too. Buttigieg had a mixed support there among black voters. He was forced to go back and deal with his own black community because of a terrible incident.
Let me just bring AB in here.
I think that helped him because he needs to get more used to going out and dealing with minority voters.
AB, do you think Pete Buttigieg rising up, he obviously speaks quite eloquently on foreign policy matters, more moderate. Do you think there's a potential following this debate for him to sort of sever some of the younger Democratic voters away from Warren? Sanders?
I think he has the big problem Pat points out with African American voters who are culturally conservative and, let's just be frank, go to church every Sunday and may not be ready to nominate a homosexual even in 2019. And that's just the truth. Many black Democrats have told me that. He is a very compelling candidate. He has an incredible life story, an incredible breadth of experience. He's very, very smart. He's raised a ton of money because people really trust him and believe he could go all the way. In a very white state like Iowa, he's a huge threat to Elizabeth Warren with that educated white liberal crowd. Whether or not that gets him to South Carolina and through, we just don't know.
Yeah, he's got more ground game in Iowa than anybody else, and he's got a lot of money. So I agree he could show in Iowa. New Hampshire, you've got 2 neighboring state senators in Sanders and Warren, so New Hampshire's a bit of a wash. So South Carolina, hold on. So South Carolina is crucial. I just want to give a shout out to A.B. Klobuchar when she called out Warren, who does tend to get sanctimonious about her positions. If you don't support her, it's because you lack political courage. And she said at one point, the question should be asked, why is everybody on the stage protecting billionaires? And Klobuchar said, nobody here is protecting billionaires. Let's do a reality check. Not even the billionaire on the stage. There was Tom Steyer supporting the wealth tax. And a lot of pundits have said Buttigieg was the winner. I didn't like his little jab at Beto O'Rourke, saying, I'm not going to take lessons in courage from you.
It was a bit aggressive.
But a lot of men in particular like that. I didn't like that.
But Eleanor, very quickly, before I go to Pat, do you think? I thought Pete Buttigieg perhaps had to do that to show that sort of, alpha male mentality that unfortunately some men would regard him because he's gay as not an alpha male. So he's showing those, I was a former soldier. Do you think that perhaps that played into the...
He'd been waiting to use that line. I just think it was misplaced on Beto O'Rourke.
No, I thought so too. I just thought that also that he should have mentioned, by the way, I was in Afghanistan.
Right.
Because a lot of folks out there still don't know that much about him. And
but the Democratic establishment If as I believe, Biden is steadily fading to the point where he could lose this thing, you got to have an alternative. And I think the one they're going to turn to again is Buttigieg, because Klobuchar, whatever you say about her, how positive she is, she got an enormous distance to run to catch up with Warren. She's going to be competing with Buttigieg for that, basically the regular Democrats. I don't see how she leaps over.
Well, there are other candidates who didn't make the debate stage, who are working the living rooms and the coffee shops in Iowa. And I would put, I think you know exactly who I'm talking about, right?
Well, I don't know.
Michael Bennet.
Yes,
and
I think Congressman Tim Ryan of Ohio also has a really, and I think he would be a great profile for a Democratic nominee from Youngstown, Ohio.
But he's not there.
But geez, not even
he has not made the debate stage.
I know. 1% in
I
Iowa.
understand that.
Well, so let's ask AB. AB, how do you see this playing out before Christmas in terms of momentum? You know, who rises, who falls?
Right. Well, again, I think that we're going to have to see. I think that Eleanor's right that the debates have not been predictive or determinative. They've not changed it so much. Although we might see that Senator Harris might have finished herself off. I doubt that she can come back into the top three. And I do think that Senator Klobuchar, if she gets some traction, that will be interesting. She had not yet made the next debate stage. And this idea of Warren in the hot seat is very important. Warren wants to impeach Justice Kavanaugh, ban fracking, give illegal immigrants free health care, take away your private health insurance. All of these positions are electoral losers.
Let's take Biden. What happens, let's say Biden's at 25%. What happens to Biden's estate if he starts sinking? Because he is holding on to these votes. Whoever the second, third, fourth, and fifth candidate is or are, they're going to need those votes. So if Biden fades, who inherits the estate, or does it go to probate?
That's why there are the candidates who haven't. The former Montana governor, Steve Bullock, is another one. They're really working the liver. So there are some potential surprises there. But again, Biden is he's the front runner basically, or he shares it with Warren. He just has to survive in Iowa. New Hampshire is kind of a giveaway state because you got two. The race moves on. You cannot.
The race moves on. Joe Biden survives. Eleanor is right on that point. Issue 2, the partisan wildfire.
I think that vote, the size of the vote, more than 2-1 of the Republicans voted to oppose what the president did, probably got to the president because he was shaken up by it. And that's why we couldn't continue in the meeting, because he was just not relating to the reality of it.
A meeting between House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and President Trump descended into farce this week, with America's two most senior politicians insulting each other. Intended to forge a bipartisan response to the crisis in Syria, Democrats left the meeting in protest at what they described as President Trump's excessive insults. The president followed up by tweeting various photos of the meeting. But with the impeachment battle looming, the nation seems to be entering a period of even greater partisan discord.
Eleanor, I thought one thing that was striking in that photo was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Mark Miley, just sitting there like this, and seeming despair about the partisanship. But what do you think about Speaker Pelosi's strategy in terms of walking out of that meeting? Was that the right thing to do?
Well, first of all, I don't know that I would call this partisanship. This is about Syria. And you've got basically the Republican Party and the Democratic Party and the foreign policy establishment up in arms over the president making a whimsical decision that allows the Turkish president to launch an assault into Syria that displaced 100,000 people and has caused lives. And then the president is claiming somehow it's a victory. He's like the arsonist who goes to the scene of the crime and then turns on the water hoses and says he's the hero. So I question the partisanship. Now, walking out of the meeting, the president called Pelosi a third-rate or a third-grade politician. And she said to him, which must have really gotten to him, with you, all roads lead to Putin. And, that is that's the core of the mystery of this president, is what is this weird relationship that he has with Putin, where Putin keeps winning, where the president keeps allowing him to win. So they walked out saying this was an epic meltdown. I don't know, on the scale of Trump's, he's having meltdowns regularly now on these rallies where he goes on speaking for well over an hour. So I don't know if this was any different than any others, but I think walking out was appropriate.
I think the rallies, though, Pat, seemed quite cathartic for the president. He's allowed to sort of...
Some of them, I mean, the one in Minneapolis is
right.
never to be topped.
But how do you see this situation?
Well, look, first I see, all this stuff going on in the cabinet stuff, what I see it as much ado about nothing. You take the resolution in the House, Mitch McConnell's going to get a resolution in the Senate. None of this establishment is going to send American troops into Syria really to stop the Turks from coming in. The fact is that the Russians, the Assad, the Iranians, Hezbollah put the blood in there and the treasure in there, and they won the war, and Syria is gone. And I mean, the United States ought to wake up to it. And what great loss is it? When was Syria in the back pocket of the United States? You know, during the Gulf War, Syria actually sent troops to help George H.W. Bush in the Gulf War. But the fact is, the Russians have had that base in there forever, and the United States has got an immense presence in the Middle East. The idea that Putin is king of Syria or king of the Middle East, as some of these papers are arguing, is absurd.
Well, what really disturbed me was the pullout was so rapid and so uncontemplated beforehand. I mean, we literally left our troops stranded there, had to be airlifted out, some of them, just to get past the lines. And there was no, I mean, they had been having a gradual pullout for weeks,
right, but isn't
months.
That history,
and now all of a sudden, boom, they've got to do it all
history.
overnight.
It's done.
Yeah, that's done. But no, just speaking as a former troop, I would have felt quite abandoned. I thought that was a terrible thing for the president to do, and it was just incompetence.
Oh, this is history, all right. Pat, this week will go down in history in this country as a travesty.
Thank you.
And what's so difficult is not only that he tactically gave away our leverage in one fell swoop, the images that the world is seeing of bipartisan, strong condemnation of the president's move in our across the board in this country, and then he continues to say crazy stuff about it's like two kids, you let them fight it out, millions of people won't die now, it's a great day for civilization. It's all a boon to Russia and Assad and the Iranians, and we're never going to dislodge Russia from Syria.
And the ISIS fighters.
Right, and the idea that the ISIS fighters are 7,000 miles away and it's not a problem for us, all of this is we're going to be dealing with for so long.
All right, put a resolution on the floor of the House and Senate that authorizes American military action in Syria, authorizes thousands of troops to turn this around and to prevent the Turks from coming in. See if these guys will vote for that. They're all talk.
No, nobody wants to vote for that. The point is
we didn't. Then give Trump a hard time, but you're not going to change it.
The point is we didn't have to get to this point.
We've been saying that for 3 weeks.
That is critical, and that is what the president did. He pulled out 1,000 troops who were acting as a tripwire. Preventing. What do we know this? Yes, he was told, and he was told all about the fallout that would happen, and now it's happened. And you're saying, oh, fine, no problem. He's created problems that didn't need to exist.
I'm not saying fine. I'm saying the United States, it was inevitable we were going to go out of there. It was inevitable that the Kurds had to pick between the Turks and Damascus. They chose Damascus rightly.
Let me challenge you on 2 points here, but I appreciate you being one voice, at least, in support of the president. Do you think there is, one of the things, I was one of those absurd writers this week saying that Vladimir Putin is the winner, because in a region defined, where politics, power is defined by perception as much as reality, the United States has seemed to show itself as unreliable now with allies, both in terms of the withdrawal in the first place. Wait. And then in the second instance, with this ceasefire, which essentially uses American diplomacy in lieu of Turkish tanks to get the Kurds to surrender. I mean, is that not right?
I don't disagree with anyone here who's talked about how this was handled and announced, and I don't like the trashing of the Kurds who fought ably right beside us. Any of that. What I'm saying is that anybody that talks about Putin of Russia being the mighty king of the Middle East, he's got an economy that's not even 1/10 of ours. I mean, he can't even get his warships. He's got to get them through the Black Sea, through the Turks.
But everyone fears him, and he is seen as someone who could be an interlocutor.
Is he popular? He gets along with Bibi. He gets along with the king of Saudi Arabia.
That's the point.
He gets along with everybody.
Because the Middle East has now been turned over to Russia, Assad, and the Iranians. And this is not good for American.
All right,
not good for American power. I remember the Republicans arguing who lost China, who lost Russia, who lost the Middle East is, I think, a powerful foreign policy issue.
Is any American going to say, let's get an army up and send them to the Middle East and really reestablish ourselves there? The American people want...
All right, Clarence time.
They're not going to give President Trump a commendation for courage and what he's done. He's done a cowardly...
Clarence, go.
Yes, sir. No,
enjoying this conversation.
Well, I'm reminded, sadly, of our pullout from Afghanistan, the original one under Jimmy Carter.
There's a new
because
one coming.
we just wanted to get out of there, right? And then what happened, suddenly Mujahideen regrouped as Al-Qaeda and other mischief makers. We wound up going in there after 9/11,
Exactly.
and that's what's happening now
Clarence
with thousands of ISIS prisoners released now.
You're right.
Same kind of potential problem.
Okay, look, do you think in 10 years we're going to be in Afghanistan? What do you think is
Before or
going to
after
happen
we get attacked?
when we pull out?
All right,
what's going to happen.
AB, in terms of strategic interest here, one argument that the president could potentially make is that, the Middle East, there are the challenges, counterterrorism, et cetera, but China is the big one. That China, in terms of its effort to displace the American-led order, really should demand the nation's attention, and we shouldn't get bogged down in foreign conflicts that take away resources from that potential struggle. What do you say to that idea?
I mean, the Chinese have President Trump's number, and all our friends and foe have Trump's number now. He's inconsistent, he's unreliable, he disdains protocol and process. His foreign policy and national security method is on his best days unserious and dysfunctional, and its worst days
do you think Lindsey Graham
can
persuade him to?
Lindsey Graham persuades him for a few days, and then on the way to Ankara, the vice president and the Secretary of State are thrown under the bus by President Trump, ranting in front of the Italian prime minister, saying, these people, these Kurds, they aren't angels. He could say that in 4 days,
But,
Tom. We have no idea.
I mean, Trump has gotten a pretty good trashing here today. But
I think on Syria it's well deserved.
I agree with a lot of the criticism of him. But does anybody think the American army is going to go back into the Middle East, that American troops are going to go
What about air power?
Well, who are you going to hit with air power?
You could deter the
You're going to fly out of insular Turkey and attack the Turkish troops in Syria?
We have carrier strike groups.
I mean, we got a base and with 50
Do we have carrier strike groups?
You're not going to attack a NATO ally. Are you nuts?
You could put them back in their box.
You're going to put your ally Turkey back in its box by attacking their
I've got to
people?
remember I'm a moderator here.
So you don't attack a NATO ally. You put the NATO in this awkward position. You drive a wedge through NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Who benefits from that? Who wants that? Whose goal has that
What
been?
do you want to do?
Vladimir Putin.
Or what do you want to do?
This president has
I know,
foreclosed
you've
a lot of
but-
options, and I'm not
but
going to
nobody
take your
will
rationale that it's all fine
But nobody
since
will
it's over
say
and done.
what they're going to do to reverse what he's done.
You can,
Nobody.
you can use military power through the carrier
Turks?
strikers and leverage. Yeah.
On the Turks?
Yeah. And
You're
the
gonna
Syrians.
NATO ally?
Do what Putin does, right? He allows the Iranians to run across Syria
look,
and Iraq, and then
you're
he says to the
talking about the-
Saudis, I'll take them on. You can play all sides here.
You're going to use the United States air power to attack a NATO ally with the second largest army in NATO? Are you nuts?
I just want to say Donald Trump just put up the white flag of surrender in the Middle East.
Very quickly, round the circle here. Will President Trump change course in Syria? Yes or no?
You can count on it, and he might change course after that again.
Okay, Pat.
How is he going to change course? Is he going to send troops back into Syria?
Yes.
I hope not.
Okay, Eleanor.
I don't think the damage cannot be undone.
No, and he won't send troops back. And like he said, my campaign promise is going to pull us out. He didn't say how he's going to pull us out. It's been a disaster, but he's not going back.
Before we get to predictions, I wonder whether one of the options for President Trump might be to use CIA paramilitary officers in place of the military. That allows him to save face, but also save some strategic interest.
If
perhaps.
he trusts our intelligence.
Anyway, predictions. Pat.
Predictions, we're not going to be killing Turks first. But secondly, McConnell's going to have a resolution in the Senate, which will probably be even tougher than the one in the House, and it'll be as meaningless.
Eleanor.
Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney has got to get himself a good lawyer because he just incriminated himself and the president in the illegal acts around Ukraine in the most amazing confessional in the White House briefing room.
Interesting. AB, do you share that perception on Eleanor's part?
I think he needs a lawyer. I do think that Senator Mitch McConnell, the majority leader, is not going to end up being correct. There will not be a trial by Christmas. It will go into 2020. And I do believe with articles of impeachment laying out multiple crimes and misdeeds, you will get between 6 and 8 Republican senators.
Wow, interesting. Clarence.
I believe a federal building will be named after Elijah Cummings, who we lost in the House this week. One of the last great voices of bipartisanship and just pulling people together. We miss that now.
And do you see any potential replacements for him in that role, that sort of elder statesman voice of reason?
Oh, goodness. Elder statesman, voices of reason. I mean, people even call us that these days.
Right.
how the level's been lowered.
Pat, on that point, though, of Mick Mulvaney, do you think he has a big problem?
I mean, I think a lot of the folks in the White House have some problems, right? Okay. I'm familiar with this situation.
You are?
Yeah.
A little Watergate building. Okay. All right.
We could do a whole show talking to you about that.
I predict that while we are focused manifestly on Syria at the moment, Mr. Kim Jong-un's White Horse adventure will be seen as a dark omen when he follows through on that symbolic act with potentially a nuclear test or a long-range ballistic missile test. I wrote about that this week. You should read it. Anyway, thank you for watching. See you next time.